All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to and I did check because Bookborn reminded me, the 26th episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy. And as you can see, here is my guest, Bookborn. It is great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Fantasy. Yeah, there's one thing you can count on me is I'll remind you about the details of something. As you just experienced you just did Book Jeopardy. You were like the last
Yes,
one, weren't
I
you?
did. I
And like
did.
I'm famously known for telling him to clear the buzzer. Like that's my claim to fame in Jeopardy. So yeah, I'll remind you the details. That's my pedantic quality.
I have watched you in Jeopardy, the one that Alan, of course, runs, that we all love so much. It is such a great feature of
So
our
funny.
community here on this platform. I have watched you, and every time I've watched you, I thought that is pretty much exactly the way I would feel in that situation. And being on the hot seat really is different. For those people who've never been in a situation like that, it is so different because when you're watching people, you're like, oh, I know that. And then when you're there, it's like nothing is working in here. The gears are all slipping.
Shuts down.
Yeah.
Completely shuts down. Yes. I told Alan, like, I can't go back on. I was like, I'm a mess for like days before I go on that. Like, it's too stressful for me.
Oh no. Well, my
Anyway,
approach, my strategy is to just accept that I'm going to make a fool of myself and then just have fun with it.
yeah.
So
And
that's
it
really,
is fun. I should say, I have a blast every time I do it. It's the
yeah.
waiting that's hard. Once you're doing it, then it's fun.
It's a lot like when I was in high school, and I was in a lot of plays in high school, and it was just right before going on, I was so nervous, and but once I was on stage and I started saying the lines, it was like, yeah, I love
So you
this.
and Alan need to put on a play. Wasn't he a theater guy too? You
Yeah,
guys
oh,
gotta.
he's
He's
actually put
huge.
out a video. I think it's still on his channel of him doing
Oh,
it's the yeah, it's the I forget what it's called, but
I know exactly what you're talking about. I
yeah.
watched it at some point.
Yeah, it's the modern
Your turn.
kind of retelling of the Iliad, but it's really tailored for an audience of today. And he
Yeah.
does such a brilliant job with it. He's
You
really
guys got to get
he's
on it. Got to do some
yeah.
booktube plays, maybe some adaptations, you know?
Yeah, we've talked about reading some Shakespeare and doing some other stuff. So yeah, who knows? That might happen. We might have some booktube plays going on. Of course, there's rumors I hear about possibly booktube D&D going to happen. So let's see
I
what
mean,
goes
I
on
have been bothering Alan about it. We don't know, huh? We can't say,
there.
will it happen? I don't know.
I mean, I'm excited for it if it happens. I haven't played D&D since I was before you were born.
You don't know when I was born.
Well,
Maybe.
I'm almost 100% sure because I was probably under 20. I was probably 18 and I'm 50
Okay.
now. So,
Okay, probably.
yeah.
Close.
It's been more than 30 years, let's put it that way, since I played. And
I'm over
I'm
30. It could have happened. But yeah, D&D is fun. You must have been playing like what edition then? Second edition?
I think so. I think so. That's what it was. It was in the mid 80s. So yeah,
Maybe even
that would be
first
second.
edition. I don't
Maybe.
know.
I think it's the second, actually.
Okay.
The first was in even as late as or the
The
70s,
70s,
right?
right? Early
Yeah.
70s. Yeah, I think you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I we play every week.
Oh,
We
you
play every
do?
week for the last like 5 years.
How cool is that?
So
Wow.
I'm very excited if it actually happens.
So you have a group of people that you play with regularly, or does that change? Or
Yeah, no, we have a group of people we've been playing with for 5 years, and we play with them every other week. And then we have another group we've been playing with for about 3 years that we play with every other week. So we just stagger the weeks.
oh, so
Um,
cool. Do you have the
Used to be in
different
person, now it's
characters?
online.
Different characters for different groups? Okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
yeah. So a bunch of campaigns. It's been really fun.
Oh, wow. Do you ever get confused? Like you're in one group and you think you're the wrong character or something like that?
Sometimes I try to play pretty, like, very different characters to help out, but there's every once in a while where I'll be like, I have an ability and I try to use it in the other group. I'm like, oh, dang it. I don't have that one. But I always
Ah.
tell people, like, D&D sounds scary, but if you like to read fantasy, there's no way you will not enjoy a good Dungeons and Dragons game.
Oh, no doubt about it. Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah.
Yeah. My two characters that were my favorites because they survived.
Isn't
Were,
that the truth?
I mean, I started with 4 or 5 characters, and I think most of them just died the first campaign I was on. And but I had 2 who survived sort of long term, and one was a thief named Ethan Dune, and another was a magician named Theodore. So yeah, I had those 2 for a while.
You always remember them. I have all my characters and always have my favorites. I'm playing someone really stupid right now because I rolled terribly on my stats.
Oh
And
no.
it's actually been really fun though. It's one of those things where sometimes things that turn out wrong can be the most fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, you got to go with what the dice give you, right? That's
Gotta
part
go
of
with
the
what the dice
game.
give you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Metaphor for life perhaps as well. Yeah.
Maybe.
So, but great. I if that ever does happen, I'm looking forward to it, especially if we get a great group together. And Alan as a DM is just like I can't imagine how much fun that would be.
It's gonna be perfect. He's gonna be a perfect DM.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So fun.
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, that is awesome. And I'm gonna, if I'm in that at all, I'm gonna lean on the more experienced players. That's for sure.
You're more experienced. You got like the original, you know. You got the real stuff. I'm just a fake fan, you know. I'm doing 5e. That's the
Oh,
newfangled stuff.
yeah. I'll go with that. I'll go with that. But yeah, I'll have to clean off a lot of rust from my brain to remember what I'm supposed to do. I imagine things have changed. I mean, there's still like intelligence and wisdom and strength and dexterity and
Yeah.
charisma,
Charisma and constitution. You named them
constitution.
all.
So they haven't changed that.
Nope. I
Oh,
think
okay.
I think if anything from my research that I've done about it is it's just gotten like easier, like more
Really?
approachable. Yeah,
Oh,
that's I mean, I think they took away a lot of the stuff that made it more difficult to get into. I mean, there's still math, but like other,
okay.
but I mean, I think they've taken the bones and just simplified it a lot. So it's
Ah,
pretty easy, I feel like, for people to like get into for as first time players.
cool. And obviously, people play online these days.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, we have to because we moved away during the pandemic. Well, we were doing it, and then during the pandemic, we had to go online, and then we moved away. So we
uh,
only play online now, which is kind of a bummer just because we have like a lot of accessories that you can like see behind me. I have like a DM board and all that
oh,
stuff.
cool. Yeah. Do you do
So
the
it's more
figures
fun.
and stuff too? The little, do you paint
We
those?
don't have figures yet just because the optics of like storing that many little things is very stressful to me. But we do have
Uh-huh.
like the we do have like the DM board and like the special like what's it called? Oh my gosh. You know, the tracker for who goes next and
Oh,
like
wow.
spell rings so you know like the distance that your spells go on the map. So we have like those fun things and
Huh.
hundreds of dice. It's an embarrassing collection at this point.
Oh, dice collection is cool to me. So, yeah.
I mean, we love it, but it is like when people come to your house, like, yeah, we own like 200 D&D dice. Like, that's
Wow.
fine.
Wow. That's awesome. I mean, there are a lot of different ones. So, yeah, I'll have to definitely dust off the part of my brain that was involved in playing that. I did have at one point, I had the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Player's Handbook, and several modules, and quite a few books. I don't remember what they all were at this point, but
We got them all right back
yeah.
there. Although you probably have the originals, like I said.
The
More.
Monsters Manual. They still have all that stuff. Okay.
Got a monster manual right back there.
Nice,
Yeah,
nice. All right. Well, so
all still
obviously
there.
Dungeons and Dragons has been a big part of your involvement in fantasy, it sounds like.
Yeah, but not until much later in life.
Okay.
I'm someone who actually has been reading fantasy since like the moment they could read.
Wow. Yeah.
I've actually I've tried to research it because it's a question I've had like why did I attach so firmly at such a young age to the fantasy genre? And I
Yeah.
can't really find an explanation.
Yeah.
Um I don't know. My sister is a huge reader, but she reads across all genres.
Okay.
And so as a kid, she's 4 years older than me. As a kid, she would just like feed me like try this, try this, try this, try
Okay.
this. So I was trying a lot of things, but I only ever attached to the fantasy and the sci-fi.
Okay.
And
Huh.
I don't know why that is, but so I've been reading it really my whole life
Oh,
because of
that's
that.
fantastic. In my book, of course, but since we're on the topic, that's a perfect segue to my standard question, which is please tell me about some of the formative reads in your life, some of the most important stories for you that I can explain, because you are what you read, sort of, kind of, right? So that's what I like to say. But I think there's some truth to that. And I do feel like a lot of times the stories we engage with do help us to discover who we are. So
Yes.
I am very curious to hear about your reading journey and some of your most formative, important stories.
Yeah, I would say the early ones would have to be anything by Gail Carson Levine. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
No, I'm
She
not.
wrote Ella Enchanted is probably her most
Oh,
famous book,
okay. Okay. I've heard of
which
that.
most people have heard of Ella Enchanted. It was actually, I mean, I loved Ella Enchanted, but it was a different, lesser known book of hers called The Two Princes of Barmere, about two sisters. One is sick. The brave one gets sick, and so the unbrave one has to go out to try to rescue her.
Uh-huh.
And that was very like that was my favorite. I read it was the first book I cried at when I was very young because it has a sad ending and it's very fantasy, like, you know, it's dragons and princesses and wizards and stuff like that. And I always like point to that as being like a very formative read for me. I was probably like 7 or 8 maybe.
Wow.
And then the other ones were a Star Wars Jedi Apprentice series.
Okay, cool.
Do you know that series? It's
I
about
don't, I have never ventured into the books. I've only
okay.
been a film since the films came out when I was a kid. I remember that's the first film I ever watched in a theater
Oh,
in
wow.
1977 was Star Wars.
So are you still a big Star Wars fan?
Oh, I am. I
Okay.
love the original trilogy. I don't
Yes.
actually mind the prequel trilogy.
Oh, great. We're gonna get along just fine.
Yeah, yeah,
That's my
good.
feelings. I mean,
That's good.
the originals are obviously the best, but the prequels. I was 10 when the first prequel came out,
Oh, that's
so
perfect
for
age. Yeah,
me,
yeah,
yeah. So I'd already seen the originals and loved them, but like those hold a place in my heart because after that I went and read. So this series I'm talking about is about
yeah.
Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon before Episode 1.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So how they met and became apprentice and master, and that was really like solidified my Star Wars obsession, which was thriving as a kid for me. And
Obi-Wan is my
then
favorite Star Wars character of all, so I think I would enjoy
me
that.
too.
Really? Oh, cool.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, Obi-Wan Kenobi is my favorite Star Wars character, which was why the recent show was a real tragedy for me.
Oh,
But
I haven't watched it. Yeah, yeah.
just do yourself a favor and don't.
Oh, okay.
From one Obi-Wan fan to another. But I mean, you'd be too old for those books. They're very young. But that was very formative. And then of course, Harry Potter. Harry Potter is probably the formative book. Let's see. I read those back in 2001. So they'd been out for a few years, I think. I was about 10 or 11.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, perfect. And only the first 3 were out. And I'm what they call the Harry Potter generation. So I was Harry's age as each subsequent book came out.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I'm always jealous of you people. Yeah.
it was, and you know, I still talk about one thing people I don't think understand about Harry Potter is that it's a very unique series because there were so many series I had read and grew out of, like Secrets of Droon. Have you heard of that series?
No, I haven't. No.
Maybe Magic Treehouse. Have you heard
Oh,
of
I've heard of
Magic
that.
Treehouse? Yeah,
Yes.
that one's like super famous. So those kind of series, they stay at the same level. So at some point, you age out of them.
Yeah.
I aged out of Secrets of Droon. I aged out of Magic Treehouse, but Harry Potter aged with me.
Yeah.
And it's a very rare. You don't see that a lot in kids' books where they move from middle grade to YA.
True. That's a really good point. I never thought of it that way. Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's a very unique thing. And because of that, that was just like Harry Potter was a core part of my personality. And people think I'm joking when I say that, but like if you talk to anyone who knew me as a teenager and like an adolescent, they'd be like, Harry Potter, core part of her personality. I think Hermione like spoke to me on such a level as so many girls, this very bossy, know-it-all, didn't always fit in, even with her friends. Like, I think that spoke to so many young women, and it definitely spoke to me. I was a bossy know-it-all as a kid. I don't think that's going to surprise anyone. Like, my dad read Harry Potter and was like, wow, you are just like this girl. I was like, I know. So
that's
as
amazing.
Someone, you know, that was probably a character that influenced who I was personally just because I identified with her so much. And it was such a big sensation. Everyone was reading it, everyone was going to the midnight book releases. That was just like such a formative part of, I think, why fantasy kept a grip on me.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very special thing, what happened with Harry Potter and your generation,
Yeah.
and even subsequent generations, I think, are still experiencing something like it, although not the way you guys got to, where you were there for the release of the next book and that sort of thing. But still, it's my older daughter is fairly close to you in age, and I got to experience them vicariously through her,
Mm-hmm.
and then with her younger sister. It was really fun to read them along with them. So I have read the series and enjoyed the books with my daughters. So
Yes.
while I'm not the Harry Potter generation, I do get
Well, I
it.
mean, my dad loved him too. Like he read them all with us. He went to all the midnight releases with us. Same thing. Like,
Oh
and
wow.
he, has a very special place like that. I mean, my dad's older than you, but
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
was the younger kid. But he experienced that with us. I think it is fun, and I'm passing it on to my son. It is difficult though because of the way they age. We're reading the third one, and then I'm like, and then you can't read the other ones for a
You
while
could wait a
because
bit. Yeah, the
they get
fourth
a
one
little
is where it
dark.
gets a bit serious, isn't it?
Yeah, and even the third one, I didn't want to read it to him. Like I've had to explain some things, but I mean, he is obsessed with it. I think there's something about those books that kids just like grab onto. I'm not really sure
Yeah,
what it
yeah.
is.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, it is it just hit something in a whole generation, and that's a pretty rare thing, actually. It's a
Yeah,
very
and
rare
I keep
thing.
hoping someone will do it again. Like I'm like I
Oh
really want
yeah,
my kids to be able to experience that level of like obsession and cultural like permeation. And so
yeah,
I'm just waiting, I'm hoping um something will happen. But
yeah. The way you can just strike up a conversation with someone you've never met before, and it's like you're good friends just on the basis of this shared story,
yeah,
right?
completely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm the worst. I have more answers to that question. I have a couple more books that
Oh,
I would
please,
say,
yeah.
is
Then
that
let's
okay?
take your
So
time.
that's like
Absolutely.
my young journey. As a senior in high school, I read a book called A Wild Sheep Chase by Haraku Murakami. I always get his
Yes,
name wrong.
yes.
Yeah, it's magical realism. I struggle with Haraku Murakami now. A lot of his books haven't aged well necessarily,
Oh, okay. Huh.
but at the time, and I still love it. A Wild Sheep Chase was a very formative book. It's a magical realism book about identity. And
Okay.
so I always count that as another one that was like, oh, fantasy can tell me new things about myself. They can inspire me to write things. And so it was just like every part of my life because then I read The Wheel of Time was my first adult fantasy when
Okay.
I was
All right.
getting my graduate degree. I had and I've talked to a lot of women. Sometimes it's hard to move on to the adult fantasy because you worry about the content of it. And I had been someone who was holding off moving to the adult fantasy because I was worried about content. I mean, I want to keep, I'll say it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But
that's absolutely valid concern, I think. Yeah.
yeah. And so anyway, I read The Wheel of Time and it was my first adult fantasy where like, I mean, that's 14 books long and they're all like 900 pages.
Pretty
And
massive. Yeah.
it really did change my life because it was just like, this is what I've been missing. Like, and from then I just never looked back, never went back to YA. It was just like, what can I read next? And so
Wow.
again, that's another series that people have complicated feelings about. I know it's not perfect. I'd never say it was, but it
Yeah.
definitely was a catalyst for me
Uh-huh.
um, as
Yeah.
a young adult to move me on from like another stage of my life.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so that's definitely another one I always credit.
I think a lot of people would relate to that, what you just said about Wheel of Time being a kind of a door into
Hmm.
this genre. I thought I've spoken to quite a few people on this series alone
Yeah.
who would say, yeah, that was the one that did it for me. It was Lord of the Rings for me,
Mm.
but I see that light in people's eyes when they talk about a certain series, and often it is Wheel of Time that brings people into the genre. I think Brandon Sanderson does it for a lot of people too,
Yes.
with
It's funny.
Mistborn.
Wheel of Time was my first Brandon Sanderson, which like he's my favorite author, so I find that always funny
Yeah.
that like I actually like met Brandon Sanderson through the Wheel of Time.
Yes. I think that's true for me too. I read Wheel of Time before I read Mistborn and Stormlight
Mhm.
Archive. I've only read the first three Stormlight Archive books, but yeah, the first thing I ever read by Sanderson was the last three books of the
Yeah,
Wheel of Time. Yeah.
yeah,
But I
it's
thought he
fun.
did a great job. I didn't
Me too.
ever say to myself, "Oh, this is so different from what Jordan was doing," And I picked up the series pretty late, actually. It was coming out when I was in college, so I didn't really know about it. I was, reading a lot of other stuff, so
Yeah.
I didn't really get to start reading it until I was probably 30 something, more even. And I remember distinctly, though, that I read the last book right when it came out. So that's
Okay,
that's
we
when I
were
was
reading
finishing.
Wheel of Time at the same time
Oh,
because
cool. Yeah.
I finished book 13 like 2 weeks before book 14 came out.
Okay. Yeah.
So like I was right there, like I just got to go and read book 14.
Yeah. Yeah. We're right about the same time then. Yep.
It's fun.
And I haven't read it since, but it made a big impression on me. That's for sure. It's been.
Yeah, I actually hadn't read it since. I just reread the first three before the last show, so last year.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's kind of like sometimes you read something once and it just kind of sticks with you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's huge, just massive character arcs in that series, right? I mean, it's just
Yes.
there's that central cast of characters, and to see them from that pretty Tolkienian beginning to where they end up at the end is just like, wow, that is something. Those are some pretty massive arcs right there.
And they had a lot of gray characters in a way that YA at the time, at least for me, didn't. Like
Uh-huh.
it was such a new thing for me to read about these characters who I couldn't just be like they're good, they're the hero, and they're the villain, and they're bad. There was a lot of complicated actions, which
Yeah.
I think is something else that really impressed upon me. Like because it was just so different than what I had been reading. I think YA has come a long way, so I won't like make that generalization for the genre now.
Yeah.
But what I was reading, over a decade ago.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm never quite sure what YA is even, because it's just something that I think was invented subsequent to Harry Potter to sort of give people an idea, if you like this, you'll like that sort of thing. And they do, of
It's
course, they talk
murky.
about it's very murky, and it can be a little bit, I think, sometimes gendered as well, because
Yes.
a lot of times when a book is either by a woman author or about a female character, it tends to be more rapidly labeled YA. So yeah,
Yeah, I've actually done a lot of research about that, and it's 100% true.
really,
To the point, that's why you see so many female fantasy authors in the adult sphere like put their name as first and second letter.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and the opposite is true if men want to write YA.
huh,
The top, I did math, the top 100 YA books, I think it was 90% of them were written by women,
wow,
which flips when you go to what's considered adult fantasy. It's like
huh,
70-30, 70 male. And
yeah.
I think a lot of it is just a weird perception versus like content of the books. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation.
I mean, it's a really interesting topic, I think, and without getting too deep into it, I think it's an important one too. I mean, I've often thought, so my top 10 fantasy video I made was conscious of the fact that three of the 10 entries were women and seven men, and that's lopsided. And so it's something I think about a lot, and I'm a kind of extra sort of, when I hear about, a great adult fantasy series by a woman author, I'm extra curious. But
Yeah, and it was interesting because I had done a standalone adult fantasy and a series adult fantasy video like top 10, and I had way more of a balanced list in my
standalone, yeah.
standalones than I did in my adult series. And I think a lot of part of that too is a lot of my series were published a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a stronger correlation. Like I feel like we are moving away from that, but a lot of those epic long series started in like either the 50s. I mean, you got Lord of the Rings like back in the 50s, but then you've got
Sure.
like 70s, 80s, 90s. And so the standalone, I just thought it was very interesting, even like racially. Like my
Yeah.
standalones were much more racially diverse
Yep.
than my series. So it's something I think about a lot too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the good thing is that fantasy is becoming more diverse. I think that's a
Yes.
wonderful thing, and that is enriching the genre incredibly. So I'm very happy about that,
Me
as I'm
too.
sure you are. Yeah. So did we cover? I think you still had a couple
No,
other.
I
Yeah.
covered it. Those are my formative.
Those are the
Yeah.
formatives. Okay.
Those are the
Well,
formatives.
those are great. And of course, you've gone on to read quite a few more series, and probably on your own, and some as a result of being here on this platform. I'm sure if you're like me, you've been introduced to things that you didn't know about before
Absolutely.
BookTube. Yeah.
So
So,
many.
yeah, I mean, and you mentioned Brandon Sanderson being your favorite author.
Yeah,
So,
probably who I consider, like if someone asks, Sanderson's my favorite author. I've read, that's also in the purview. All of his stuff. His his world building is just something that
oh wow, yeah,
speaks to
it's
me, you know?
yeah, he's it does an incredible job with that. And what the thing I admire, and keeping in mind I've only read Mistborn and the first three Stormlight Archive books, but the thing I admire is how he is so good at making the magic system part of the story. The
Mm-hmm.
emergence of the characters becoming familiar with the magic is something that hooks me too, because I'm becoming familiarized with this and what it can do. And as the character finds out, what other powers come along with this or how far we can go with this, I'm finding out at the same time and sort of experiencing it vicariously. I think that's a brilliant thing that he's just tapped into really well.
And he writes some very heroic characters, which is like
Yeah,
just something that's very nice to read a lot, even though I have a lot of books that aren't like that that I love.
yeah,
It feels good sometimes just to
yeah.
read about heroics.
Those yes moments.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. I can think of a few
Yeah,
from
they're all over the Stormlight Archive. Yeah,
Kaladin and Dalinar and the gang, and yeah, I mean there's some real
all of them. There's some good
pretty
moments in there.
shout out loud moments, definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. So yeah, and I haven't moved on yet to the fourth book, Rhythm of War. I was going to read it when everyone else was when it came out, and somehow I just didn't get to it. And now I'm just going to wait till shortly before the fifth book.
I was
That's
like, that's smart. At this point, you might as well just wait and then
yeah.
just read it all in one go.
Because when he announced it was going to be like a year later than planned, I was like, yes, because I hadn't read the fourth one yet.
You're like, I
So
need time.
yeah, it's okay, Brandon.
But have you been keeping up with Era 2, Mistborn, or have you just read Era 1?
No, yeah, just only the first three.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, sometime I'll try them out. Are you? So you're keeping up with everything, right?
Yeah, I just finished. So the fourth book of that Era 2 just released on Tuesday. So I finished that. It was good. Era 2 isn't like my favorite. I will
Uh-huh.
admit that. Like, I am just not really a Western gunslinging kind of gal. Just like not
Yeah.
my personal thing. I enjoyed them. I mean, the thing about Sanderson is they're all quick reads. Like, I think the longest one is 400 pages. So it's not
Uh-huh.
exactly like tough to get through. You know what
With
I
the
mean?
exception of Stormlight Archive. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I'm just saying just Era 2, it's okay that's
Uh-huh.
not, necessarily my thing. I have to keep up with it though because I want the whole Cosmere, like I need to
Oh
know
yeah.
all of the things. So,
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever going to read everything in the Cosmere. I don't think so. Well, you never know though. Never say
well,
never.
at least read Warbreaker because that's my personal favorite Sanderson. So
Okay.
you've got to at least read. That's a standalone. It's not a series. So
I hear
like,
that a lot. I hear that Warbreaker is often spoken of as one of his best books or a favorite among a lot of his fans. So
yeah,
I will do that. I'm writing
at
down
least at
Warbreaker.
least read that one. Do me a favor, and then you don't have to read any of the other ones.
And is that's one of the ones that will help to understand Stormlight Archive as well, or is it totally unrelated?
Yes, actually, you will see a character crossover.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, Warbreaker was written first though. So it's kind of fun that you'll be coming at it from a different direction.
Yeah.
That'll be cool.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also fun. The little Easter eggs and stuff that
Yeah.
the
I
Cosmere
like it.
fans get, and then they just go right over my head for the most part. Although I do recognize certain characters, especially one character who seems to show up in just about every Cosmere
Yes.
book. So
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We all know who it is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying not to be spoilery
Yeah,
here.
the word it's good. Don't spoil it, but yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I think you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's fun. And I think it's interesting this last book, Sanderson's starting to put it like directly into the book. So like you don't have to be the person who keeps up with all of this stuff. Like he's just like writing it straight out so that it's understandable on the page,
Yeah.
which I think is really nice because it's like not everyone's got the time to go like live on the 17th shard and
Right.
research all the theories, you know? So I think it's
Yeah.
cool. He is bringing it like directly into the books.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fun. That is fun. So, well, that is so cool. And I did watch your top adult fantasy videos, so I'm aware of some of your other favorites. And besides Sanderson, you had a couple there that I'm really interested in, actually. One being the
Which ones?
Greenbone Saga,
Oh,
which I have not by Fondly. I've not read that yet, but I hear so many people who love it. I recently talked to May Between the Pages,
yeah, I
so
watched that episode. Yeah.
you know Taylor. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So she told me about Greenbone Saga, and of course, Patrick, as you know, is a huge
Yes.
fan of Greenbone Saga, and quite a few other people. Mike over at Mike's Book Reviews read it recently and really liked it, I
He
think.
liked it.
So yeah, lots of people are pretty into it. So I feel like, all right, I've got to find out what this is all about. And you love it, I
It's really
guess,
good.
right?
Yeah, it is really good. It's very stressful. Like those are the books that are very hard because it's just like it's she keeps it very tense the entire way through. Like she does such a good job of that. But yeah, it was excellent. Definitely one of the best trilogies I've read in a while,
Wow.
and
Wow.
I'm very excited for her future projects.
Yeah,
It's so
very
good.
cool. Yeah, I feel like, and that's not her first book ever,
I
right?
don't think it
Yeah.
is. I need to go look at her other stuff. I just don't think her other stuff caught on quite as much.
Mhm.
I think she might have another trilogy or something.
I feel like that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that in one of the interviews I was watching, that she's written other stuff. It might not even be fantasy for that matter.
Oh, I don't
I'm
know.
not sure. I'm not 100% on that, so don't quote me there.
I
Um,
was. It's funny that you say that because I was thinking. I think it's something different, like whether that's YA or not fantasy. Like I remember thinking the same thing. Like, oh, it's in a different category somehow from Greenbone. I just don't
yeah,
know how.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe we're both wrong. Who knows? They'll correct
Yeah,
us
we
in the
could be.
comments.
I'm sure somebody will tell us in the
Yeah.
comments. So, which would be very nice. And the other one you'd mentioned that I'm very curious to try, because I've heard of people praising it, like Jimmy from the Fantasy Network, in a big way, is the Dandelion Dynasty. So that seems like it would be right up my alley.
It's so good. It is very different than Greenbone, where it's definitely a lot slower and more of a journey and just like more political inner workings. But
Okay.
the series as a whole is just so satisfying. And I got to interview Ken Liu twice,
Yeah. Wow.
which was
Lucky
super.
you.
Oh, so lucky. I feel so fortunate. And the way he talks about it even gave me more insight about how he wanted to use Chinese history because the West is so unfamiliar with the Chinese historical origin stories. Like he's like, if you ask an American, Americans are very connected to, America's origin story. Like, and that pops up in a lot of fantasy origins, like which I had never realized before, but it does. And so
Hmm.
we talked about like introducing the West to, Chinese history in that same way
Hmm.
through fantasy was kind of something he thought about, and which I didn't even realize, but it still worked for me not knowing that. But now knowing that, it made it deeper, my understanding of like what he was doing. Anyway, it's just a fantastic series. Some
Wow,
great
that's
characters.
cool. Yeah, that sounds really
Yeah.
cool. And I've heard him interviewed, and he seems really brilliant.
He is a smart dude. Yeah,
Yeah.
he just he is such a smart and thoughtful person. Now, you could also read his short story collection to start
Hmm.
off, which is the Paper Menagerie,
Yeah.
which a lot of people have praised as well.
Didn't he win
That was
some?
like my top book of the
He
year.
won a pretty big award for that, didn't he?
It was the first short story to win the Nebula, the Hugo, and the World Fantasy Award.
Oh, a few pretty big awards there.
Yeah, just a few. So that was for the titular story, the Paper Menagerie, which is just it is such a good story. But the whole collection is very, very good, and it mixes magical realism, sci-fi, and fantasy. So it's a very interesting
Cool.
collection for that reason too.
Well, that sounds like a must-read author for me, for sure. Yeah.
To me, it is. Yeah, I tell everyone, I'm like, you got to do it. I'm trying to read all of his stuff, slowly going through it. And he's, I don't know, this might not interest anyone, but I also read this really interesting New York Times article about him because I was noticing I've been reading some Chinese sci-fi in translation, and
Uh-huh.
like 100% of it's translated by Ken Liu. And
Really?
I was, yeah,
Wow.
so much of it. And anyway, they did a New York Times article about how basically he's been one of the main forces to bring Chinese science fiction to the West because he translated so much of it. And so he's been really involved in that as well, which I find very cool and fascinating.
Wow, I'd love to ask him, if somebody's probably asked him this already, but how being a translator helped him to hone his craft as a writer of an original story.
Yeah,
Um,
he did an AMA on Reddit and someone did ask that, but I can't remember his answer. I'll have to go
uh,
look for it. But they did ask him about his translation work, and how it's
wow,
influenced him. But
wow, so cool. Huh. That's amazing. And another one that you mentioned that you came to later after, in this case, I think you watched the films like a lot of people your age first.
I know which one this is.
Yeah, Lord of the
Your
Rings.
favorite, right?
Yeah, well, it was my favorite for
At the
most of
time.
my life until
Yeah.
I did my great big Malazan read, but we can talk about that later.
We can talk about Malazan. I knew we were going to talk about Malazan at
I
some
mean, I,
point.
I sort of force it on everybody I talk to.
But yeah, Lord of the Rings, it's so interesting because I was just talking. I don't know if you know Kyle from Read by Kyle at all,
I
but
do, I do know him. Yeah.
okay, a little bit, yeah. He says he finds it very interesting because I was extremely familiar with the movies. I had seen them several times, was very in love with them, but it wasn't until 2017. So it wasn't even like that long ago, like 5, 6 years ago,
Yeah.
that I was like, I guess I should like read the books. Like I read a lot of books. I guess I should like read The Hobbit and I should read The Lord of the Rings. And I went into it with a horrible attitude. It's embarrassing. I went into it being like, the movies are going to be better. Like this is, it was written a long time ago. And then I read it and it was like, I was like crying. I was like, this is like the
Oh,
best book I've ever read. And I liked the books more. And I mean, I still love the movies, but the
yeah.
books took a special place. And he feels like it's really rare for me to have been so close to the movies and then read the book and still felt like the book was better. But the Scouring of the Shire, so many people had told me, like, oh, you're going to hate it. It's so terrible. And I read it and I was like, this is so good. What is everyone talking about? Like, this makes all the themes of the entire trilogy, like, it brings home the entire theme of the novel. Like,
Yeah.
anyway,
Oh yeah,
I
that
really love
makes, I
it.
mean, these are words that make my heart sing, but I do think Kyle is right that you're probably in the minority of, based on totally anecdotal, by the way,
Yeah, and
but
that's what he said too. It's anecdotal.
yeah, but I would say I more often hear from people who say, I love the movies, I tried the books, but they were too slow, or, I didn't like the poetry or whatever. And I think I've heard that experience more often. But then,
Yeah.
I've also heard from people who say, I knew the movies and I started reading the books and they were too slow for me. But then I kept going. And actually, after finishing The Lord of the Rings, I went back to more modern fantasy and felt like it's too abrupt. I'm not getting enough out of it. I don't know if you experienced anything like that, but
Yeah, it was interesting because so I started with The Hobbit and it did take me a little bit to get into the flow. I always tell people like you have to get into the flow of it because if you're reading a bunch of modern stuff, which I was, and then you go back to Tolkien, it is just there's like a language barrier a little bit.
yeah.
And so it took, a little bit, but once I was in the flow of it, then it was like I couldn't stop. So like I just went straight through. Like I didn't read a book in between because you're like once you're in that flow, you've got it. But I think for me, one of the big things was I had never seen any Hobbit adaptation. So I hadn't seen like the cartoon.
Uh-huh.
Like I didn't know anything about the Hobbit. And so my only vision of Bilbo Baggins is what you saw in the Lord of the Rings movies.
Uh-huh.
So I thought he was kind of like a lame dude because I had no because all you see him is like with the ring and he kind of goes scary and like
Yeah.
so when I read The Hobbit, like I fell in love with Bilbo Baggins. Like
Uh-huh.
I fell in love with him as a character. And so I think that also really influenced how I felt about The Lord of the Rings because it
Yeah.
just felt like it had changed everything I knew or thought I knew about the story.
Yeah.
And so I think that is a big factor for me. Like I really loved The Hobbit. um,
Yeah.
which is a good place to start, I think, for people because it is a little bit faster paced as well.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's the genius at the heart of it, which is that Bilbo Baggins is someone who goes on the hero's journey, but he's like us. He's just sort of this
Yes.
little person in a big world. And we kind of grow with him in the process of that journey. And you can see there's these pivotal moments in his little hero's journey where he becomes more and more independent, and he in fact becomes depended on instead of this bit of luggage they're dragging along the way. He actually becomes the person they eventually rely on to do the right thing. So
And I think the context of really how difficult it must have been for him to have the ring that many years, like
yeah,
it's a context I didn't have in the movies just from watching them.
yeah,
And so I think that context also made the whole lore of the ring much richer for me. I just felt like I understood
yeah,
so much more. And again, I think the movies did a fantastic job, but I think just a lot of the themes get a little lost, not because of anything they did, but when you're reading just a slower book and you have more time to kind of ruminate in what's being said, it just
yeah.
at least hit home, the whole thing about war and yeah, like you said, hobbits are really a stand-in for us. I feel like, in a larger world, like it just came out a little more for me, and I don't know, it
Yeah.
was a moment for me.
Yeah, and if you think about what Bilbo did, he did something I think it's fair to say, except maybe Tom Bombadil, no one else could do, which was to give away the ring.
Yeah.
Which is, you think about that, Frodo couldn't do it. I mean, it's kind of spoiler. Sorry if you haven't
Okay,
watched.
you're allowed to spoil Lord of the Rings at this
I think
point.
it's okay for Lord of the Rings, but Bilbo essentially, when Gandalf at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, he had some push from Gandalf there, but he did something no one else could do, which was to willingly give up the ring. Which is, you think about that, that's maybe the single greatest act of heroism in the entire Middle Earth. No one else was able to do that, and even Gandalf said, "No, don't give it to me, because I wouldn't be good." And Galadriel's able to resist taking it,
The
but she never
temptation,
had
yeah.
to own it the way Bilbo did. So
Yeah, and it's just so fantastic. I mean, it's in the movies, but the way those all interact, like you said, like Bilbo and Frodo and Sam and Galadriel and how, even Boromir, it's just the tragedy of it, but also the heroics of it is
yeah,
just throughout the entire novel. And especially for me, as much as I loved the moment in the movie where Eowyn kills the Nazgul,
yeah,
in the book, it was even more like you got to see a little bit more of her and Mary's relationship and
yeah,
how she understood Mary being left behind because she was always left behind. And that was something that didn't come through the movies for me. And so that relationship was so sweet for me as well. Like that she was looking out for him in a way that other people hadn't let her be. Anyway, I
yeah.
could go on for ages. I really loved it.
Oh, it's good. I mean, I think that Jackson, like you said, I think he did a great job with it. I would say that because it's a film, there's more emphasis on action and less
Hmm.
on the reverence that permeates Tolkien's writing.
Yes.
That's a huge part of Tolkien, which you can't duplicate, even though he has glowy elves and that sort of thing in there.
Hmm.
But you can't really get the same depth of reverence that Tolkien has poured into his writing.
Yeah, and
So
it's always going to be an issue. I mean, there's a lot of adaptations I really love, but film and books are fundamentally different medias. And
yeah,
so,
yep.
because of that, there's always something lost in translation. There's always something lost in translation. Yeah,
Yeah,
period.
yeah. No, it's so true. And I think you made some videos about the Wheel of Time adaptation and the more
Hmm.
recent Rings of Power adaptation, and the things that the decisions that they made that you felt were not so good, and decisions that were probably okay. But I think the fundamental thing that people need to remember is that just what you said, they're different media, so you can't expect the storytelling to be beat for beat the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to work. So
Yeah. And on. So I try to be really generous usually. I know I've hated the last couple things, but in general, I do try to be generous with it because I do understand that it can't ever be, and especially like, I mean, wheel time was always going to be tough because the minute you have an
oh,
emotional
yeah,
connection to something, like, then it also, you become unable to really see reason about it, which is like, I admit up front, like, you
yeah.
know.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, it's hard to separate your vision of that story, which really, by the way, even though it's a book, which no one can ever take from you, even though it's a book, the story here is in here. This is where it happens when you're reading the book and you have a vision of that story. And it can be jarring when someone else's vision is put in front of you on a screen and it doesn't match your vision. It can be jarring and upsetting, I think, for the really dedicated fans, right?
And I think it's also like that's why even book discussions become a thing because you don't realize how much you give of yourself while reading a novel. Like that's why people can interpret a character's actions in totally separate ways just based on their own baggage and history they're bringing to the novel. And I
So
think it just
true.
gets multiplied once it's on an adaptation level.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. So my strategy whenever I watch an adaptation, and I admit when I was very nervous when Lord of the Rings was being made by Peter Jackson in
Mm.
2000, 2001. Uh, I was super nervous. I thought, oh, what are they going to do to my beloved story here?
Did you
Fortunate,
like it?
I did. So the
Okay.
first film is my favorite, and I like the others too. I love the others, but for me, Fellowship of the Ring was the best of the three because they started to get more and more into the CGI, which
Hmm.
to me started to take over the story a bit. Whereas I felt like there was a more organic feel to Fellowship of the Ring, and they were relying on a variety of techniques. So I'm so geeky. I even watch in the extended edition. They have all these, how they made the film and how they did
Yes.
this scene and that, and I watched all that stuff
I've
too.
watched so much of it too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I do think that the Fellowship, the first few minutes, I saw the Shire after the opening Galadriel's, little
Yeah,
dialogue
thingy.
monologue there, which I thought, okay, that's a good way to get people sort of caught up, I guess. I mean, just
There's a
scrunch
lot of
thousands of
history.
years into these little, but that's fine. I saw the Shire and I was like, oh, they did it. They did it. This is the Shire. I'm there. So they
I mean,
hooked me.
even today, I feel like people hold that up as one of the visually best adaptation wise. Like
Yeah.
the visuals they used were just so good
Yeah.
in that film.
So good. Yeah. And the sounds too. I love Howard Shore's soundtrack for Lord of the
Oh,
Rings, and even went
beautiful.
to a concert once, which was essentially watching the film. This was at Lincoln
I've
Center.
heard of these.
Yeah, it's
And
so
then they
cool.
live play it.
And they live played with an orchestra. They were conducting it, and it was just so one of my
Always wanted
best.
to go to one of those.
Oh, you should if you can do. It's one of the best experiences ever. I think they're doing another one in New York pretty soon, but
Well, that doesn't help me. I
no.
don't live anywhere near New York.
Sorry, sorry. I
I'll have
hope
to check.
they're
I'll have to
touring.
check. I bet there's some on my coast. I bet there's something
I hope
something over
so.
here on the West
I
Coast.
sure hope so. Yeah, because it is a really wonderful experience to have that. It's just so moving. So I did it with Fellowship. I only did it with Fellowship of the Ring. But
So cool.
yeah, great experience. If you ever have
So
a
how did
chance.
you feel about The Hobbit then?
So the issue with the Hobbit then is compounded when if my problem with Return of the King versus Fellowship is they're going a little too far with they're falling in love a little bit too many with their toys. I felt like Peter Jackson just went ballistic with his toys in The Hobbit, and to the detriment of the story in this case.
I mean, I didn't finish all three of them.
Oh, really?
No.
Okay, yeah,
I couldn't even make it through it. Like it was just
yeah.
that's another problem. I just feel like everyone's making things too long. I'm like, if you did the Lord of the Rings trilogy with a movie per book, you could have fit The Hobbit into a book.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It should have been one at most two movies, really one. And
It's unfortunate
unfortunately,
because they had great casting. I
yes.
really loved Martin Freeman as Bilbo.
Yep. Yep. I thought he
But
did a
yeah.
great job. Yep. The
No, I
CGI
never
is
watched the third
brilliant.
movie. Never watched
Yeah.
the third movie, which is like, nope, I'm too sad. Because
The
those did come
third,
out after I read it. So it was like,
I don't think you would like the third movie.
I know I wouldn't. I didn't make it. Well, I fell asleep during the second one. Like, I watched the first one, didn't like
Okay.
it, tried to watch the second one, and like my body, I always say it shut down. It was like, you're just not going to finish watching this. Like, it's too much for you. So we're going to go to
Ouch.
sleep. And then I just didn't watch the third.
The third Hobbit movie is essentially an extended battle sequence.
And I struggle too with like The Hobbit of all the Lord of the Rings books has the most action in it already.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they were adding plot lines, I was like, it just doesn't need it. Like, there's already a lot of plot. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, it's
more of a bummer.
unfortunate that, and I think there were certain things that drove them in that direction. The idea of
Mhm.
making it 3 films and filling it with all these special effects and all that. Um, it they made money off of it, I'm sure. So that was
Sure they
probably
did.
a primary goal, but I don't think that you could call them the great storytelling that the films, for me at least, the Lord of the Rings films were great storytelling on screen.
And I think the time just proves it because I don't really hear people talk about The Hobbit at all anymore. Like I don't,
Hmm.
unless I guess it's in a negative way. Whereas
True.
people are still constantly talking about the Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah.
And at
Yeah.
this point, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, but about 20-ish years maybe now since the Lord of the Rings
I
movies
think
came
it's
out.
2001, 2, and 3 when they came
That's what
out.
I
So
was
yeah.
thinking. About
Yeah.
10 years and people, or 20 years, I mean, and people are still holding those up as a representation of what should be done. Like, I think that means something.
Yeah, it does. It really does. Yeah. Yeah, incredible. And I felt like, of course, I'm a bit biased, but I felt like the films deserved all the Oscars that they got.
Me
And,
too.
I mean, the Return of the King got 11, I believe, which is a record.
11.
It's a record,
Well,
right?
because
It's
they,
tied with
yeah,
Ben-Hur and Titanic, I think, right?
yes, I think that's right. Because I remember watching that and being like, they won all 11. And it was a big risk because they filmed all three at the same time.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so I remember that being a very, very big deal.
yeah. And of course, if you count the Oscars they also won for Fellowship and Two Towers, then they won more than anyone else. So,
Than anyone else. Yeah.
yeah.
Now, did you watch Rings of Power?
I did. I did. I actually covered it on the channel with my friend AP Canavan.
Oh,
And
I need to go watch those. I didn't know you covered them.
yeah, we did. We
Yeah.
did. So we traded episodes. I did the odds and he did the evens, I believe. And we were, I think, on YouTube somewhat outliers
You guys
because
loved it?
we I wouldn't say I loved it, but I liked it. I'm not probably the best person for television in general because I usually, when I'm watching a television show, I'm thinking I could be reading a book. But
So like I don't watch a lot of TV outside of like adaptations
yeah,
for the same reason.
yeah, yeah. But I did actually. So my strategy when watching an adaptation, and I think I was going to say this earlier and I didn't, but it is simply I remove myself from my love for the book. And I say, okay, this is a story that I don't even know yet because they're going to do things that are different from the book. And I'm just going to treat it like an independent thing. And that worked to some degree. I also, though, ended up with Rings of Power kind of appreciating some of the stuff that were echoes of. This is going to sound weird because a lot of people who are really into Tolkien were objecting whenever the show went against what they call the lore. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but I thought thematically they were trying to do some interesting things that were in line in some ways with Tolkien's lore. So, for example, Tolkien is somebody who was very interested in exploring the theme of power, as you know, and what power does to people. And that's something you saw all along in the film. And pride is another one, or in the series. Pride is another one. Pride is a huge thing if you read the Silmarillion. I mean, it's very biblical in a sense, where a lot of the stuff that happens because of pride. Even with characters that you're kind of sympathetic toward, it's pride that leads them to do something tragic. And I think that the show was trying to explore those themes in a way that was Tolkienian with a lot of reverence, almost on a mythical level. But it didn't work for a lot of people, obviously.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that because I read the Silmarillion right before Rings of Power came out,
Uh-huh.
just because I wanted to prepare myself, and I actually did notice the same thing that I thought overarchingly they actually had thematically several themes that were found in the Silmarillion.
Yeah.
So I actually noticed the same thing too, especially about like pride and darkness and things like that. Now
Yeah.
the show didn't work for me mostly because I was bored a lot.
Uh-huh.
It was just really long. Like I just the over hour episodes. Like I watching a movie every week it's just hard for me because I just don't like to commit to like an hour and a half in front of a TV.
Yeah.
So that was hard, and I just think they ended up not delivering in the end. But I agree that surprisingly, I actually think there were attempts thematically, I think, to match the Silmarillion. So I
Yeah.
would agree with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just can't be as dramatic as a lot of people. Like the Rings of Power didn't ruin my life. Like I
No.
was bored, and I think they kind of dropped the ball on things they were trying to do. Like I just didn't think they were successful. But like also, I think there was an effort made. Like I don't think they were just like
Yeah.
we're trying to do whatever we want. Like there was an effort, you
Yeah,
know.
there were some very extreme accusations made about the show and that sort of thing, and I thought that's too bad. I mean, it felt like a lot of people were determined to hate the show no matter what. So, and I
Well, and
don't
that
think it
happens
was.
with every adaptation, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
with the Wheel of Time too. It's just like let's just give it a chance. Like at least watch it, you know.
right, right, yeah, yeah. I felt that way, but and it wasn't the most brilliant screen storytelling ever, that's for
No.
sure. But I thought it had its virtues, and I thought they were trying to do some interesting things. And I wasn't as critical as many people were of the acting. I thought it was fine. I thought the actors did a great job with what they were given. It's tough to pull off that kind of lofty, Shakespearean kind of level of
Speech.
yeah, speech and mythical storytelling. It's really tough to do, and not have it come off as
I actually just think they bit off more than they could chew, is what I always just said about the show. It was just like there was too
yeah,
many threads, too
yeah,
many plot points. Like, and I told people like if you read the Silmarillion, that is the Silmarillion. Like the Silmarillion has like 800 things going on, so I
yeah.
understand why. But like I think for inexperienced showrunners, like that was a big task to try to like
Oh my goodness.
put
One of,
forward, you
yeah,
know?
yeah, you're right. It's a huge task. One of the biggest you could come up with for an adaptation, really. So,
Yeah.
but I thought it was okay. I will watch the second season if there is one. So we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not going to. It's too much of my
Okay.
time. I was just like, I mean, like, if people are like, oh, they fixed all the issues, like, they've really gone, you know, like,
Yeah.
they know where they're going. Because, like, my biggest complaint of it was just like, I felt like with Galadriel, for example, we'll just use her, like, they had some really good ideas, but they just didn't, like, follow through, was, like, my biggest issue. Like, I just felt like there was a lack of follow through on almost every story
Yeah.
thread.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I'm too bored. So again, if they were 40-minute episodes, I think I would watch it. It's like
Interesting.
just the
Yeah.
hour and 15 is just such a commitment for my evening because like after the kids go to bed and my bedtime, there's about a 2-hour window
Yeah.
for me to do all of the things I need to do with my children asleep. And you're telling me that I need to take up 70% of my 2-hour window with your TV show? I'm just
Yeah.
saying I need it to be like mind blowing at that point. Whereas like
Yeah.
40 minutes is only like 45 or 45% of my time window.
Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah. No, no, and like I said, I'd rather be with a book,
Yeah.
most of the time. But
Yeah, agreed.
yeah. So another series that I know you enjoy and we have in common is First Law. And have you had not yet got to the final trilogy or the
No, I
Age of
haven't
Madness?
gone to Age of Madness because I'm trying to focus on SPFBO right now. So I told
Oh, good
myself
for
I
you. Yeah, I wanted to ask you
couldn't
about
read
that
it.
too.
I was like,
Yeah.
I can't read it until I'm done with those. But yeah, so I've read everything until Age of Madness.
Okay, cool. Well, just briefly then, I think you're gonna love Age of Madness.
Everyone's been saying that. I'm like so
Yeah.
stoked.
Yeah. For two reasons. Well, three actually, because if you love First Law in general, you're gonna love Age of Madness. Reason number two, I think Abercrombie's gotten much better at incorporating theme into
Mm.
his story and some very important ones, very Dickensian. I don't know if you've read like Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South or that sort of thing, but a lot of 19th century novels were about the social disruption and inequalities and that were coming about as a result of industrialization and capitalism and so on and so forth. So he's really gotten into this pretty well.
Mm.
Reason number three, his by far most complex, most interesting female characters are in Age of
That's what I've heard.
Madness. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone said like, look, he really nails it when it comes to his female characters in Age of Madness.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty stoked about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
my unpopular Abercrombie opinions. I think The Heroes is my favorite of all of them so far.
Oh, cool. I like the heroes a lot. I love it actually. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of people don't like the heroes, but
Ah,
yeah, I've really, really loved the heroes.
Red Country is my least favorite, but it's still Abercrombie, and I love it. So
I understand. Red Country is pretty low on my list. It's not my least favorite. It's hard though because I still really enjoyed reading it. But it's just like
Mhm.
compared to his other works, it just doesn't hit quite as hard, I feel like.
Yeah, maybe for me it was there were certain characters that I was sad to see their fates. I guess that we'll just keep it
Yes.
to that.
That
So
is the one thing about Abercrombie is you
yeah,
just it's sad. I actually did a video calling it the anti-hero's journey, like where
yeah.
it's literally the opposite of the hero's journey, where like instead of like coming back around and being like success, it's just like the opposite, like you do it backwards and it's like depression. Everyone ends up right where they were. There's no growth. And
You're so right.
that can be hard to read sometimes, but he just does it so well,
Yep.
you know?
You nailed it. You really nailed it. I feel like Abercrombie is grimdark not because of the violence and the visceral battle scenes and all that, but because everyone ends up so alienated and
Yes.
so just absurd. And yet he is so funny that
So funny.
I don't feel depressed when I'm reading Abercrombie because he's so damn funny. But I should be depressed at just how alienated and absurd these characters end up.
Yeah, it's funny. I had stayed away from Grimdark for a really long time because I just thought with my personality it wasn't my thing. I was influenced to read Abercrombie, loved it, tried some other Grimdark and was like, okay, I just like Abercrombie because he hits a nice little. I just found out, yeah, it's not, I don't, Grimdark's not for me, but Abercrombie is because he is so funny.
Yeah.
And And again, his grimness is more about the human condition than to be overly violent or sensational with the things that happen. It's really just like, wow, this is it, the grimmest part of the human condition.
It's true. It's true. Though there's plenty of violence and action and all that too.
Yes,
But yeah,
yes.
you nailed it, I think. So yeah, it's a great series though, and I'll read whatever he comes. I have not read his other trilogy, the
The
Half
Half the
a
King.
King and all that stuff. Yeah, I haven't read. Have you read those?
Well, I actually did read the first book of those a long time ago.
Okay.
And actually had forgotten I'd even read an Abercrombie when I read the first law,
Oh
and then
wow.
realized it was the same author. I didn't love it,
Mhm.
and I've heard, yeah, I think it just didn't hit for me personally.
Okay.
Um, but I think it's written for a younger audience. Actually, I think that's his YA series,
That's what they say. Yeah.
and so I haven't felt the need to go back, but I am going to read any of his adult works that he publishes for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, awesome. And like you, I'm just sort of you're ahead of me in Discworld, but I've read four books in
Oh,
Discworld. And, enjoyed every
this
single one
one's
of them.
great.
Uh,
Are you
and
going in order?
I started out doing it in order, and I realized I want to try different. So I
Mm,
started reading The Color of Magic and The Light Fantastic.
yeah,
Those are the first two, right?
those are the first
And
two.
and then I decided, I want to try some other different characters because those were
Mm-hmm.
fine. But I kept hearing Alan talk about guards,
Guards.
guards.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I had to read that. And I talked about it with Alan, and it was a lot of fun. And that quickly became my favorite. And then I recently read the first of the Witch books, Equal
Equal
Rights.
rights.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a lot of fun. So
Yeah, I Equal Rights wasn't my favorite when I read it because that came right after The Light Fantastic.
yeah. So that's
And I
another
actually
one.
preferred, my unpopular opinion is that I preferred The Color of Magic. I really
Interesting.
liked it.
Okay.
But the second book of the Witches series, Weird Sisters,
Yeah.
rivals Guards for me right now as my favorite of
Wow.
his.
Okay.
I think I've only read 11 or 12. I don't know. I'd have to count. But yeah, so the second of the Witches series is really good.
Cool. I have that ready to go. So I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it. Yeah. Neat. And before we get on to the SPFBO, because I do want to chat with you a bit about that, if you don't mind.
Of course.
But do want to just do a little tiny query, because I think you mentioned, at least in a comment in your video on your top ones, that you were going to try out Malazan in 2023. Did I hear that
Yeah,
right?
I'm starting in January.
Okay. All right.
But my stories, I've actually read Gardens of the Moon already a
Yeah.
long time ago. I
Yeah.
don't know if you knew that, but thought I was too stupid for the series. read it like a decade ago, and I was like, I don't understand anything that's happening. Like I enjoyed it, but I was like, I I felt like I had gotten dropped into like the book 10 because I read Gardens of the Moon right after finishing Wheel of Time pretty much.
Uh-huh.
And maybe after I had read like Mistborn in between or something, like a couple of things. But when you compare like the straightforwardness of Sanderson and Wheel of Time, and then all of a sudden I'm reading Gardens of the Moon, I was like, I don't even understand what's going on. But now that I understand that that's a normal feeling, it's acceptable in Malazan to just like half the time not know what's going on.
Yes.
I'm very, very excited to actually try it again. I feel like,
Cool. Cool.
yeah.
Yeah. Not only is that acceptable, but I think it's also good to just go in realizing that Erickson and also his friend Esselmont, who wrote other Malazan books,
Mhm.
they often are deliberately going against the tropes, that they
Mhm.
are subversive a lot of the time with what they're doing. So a lot of us fantasy readers go into a fantasy expecting to be following along with a certain hero or protagonist at least, or maybe a group of characters that we're going to, go on this journey with. And Erickson does something very different,
Mhm.
where you have a certain group of characters in this book, and then book two, whoa, what gives? We're on a different continent here, and
Yes.
it's a bunch of different people, and
Perfect.
what am I doing here now? So you're constantly thrown off a little bit in the beginning, I think, of the series because you're having to get accustomed to different casts of characters in different locales, but it all comes together in a Malazan convergence is the word. They talk about a Sanderlanche in
Yeah.
Malazan terms. You talk about convergence.
The convergence.
So yeah, so every book has a convergence, but all the series as a whole comes to a convergence as well. So you do get these three different locales being, the stories that take place there get woven together in a way that's, I think, is pretty awesome. But yeah, you have to
Yeah, and
let go of a lot of those normal expectations, I think, with Malazan.
I think it also I'm grateful I have another decade of adult fantasy reading like under my belt. Like I even noticed when I reread The Wheel of Time almost a decade later, like I was keeping track of names and places way better than the first time I had read it. And so I
Yeah.
think I also have like, I worked out a little bit. My reading muscles worked out a little bit. I think I'm ready to take it on
Yeah.
and like
Yeah.
keep track and understand. So I'll have to be watching all your videos to like
Oh yeah.
to like help me make sure I'm understanding everything as I go along.
Yeah. Oh, I had so much fun making the videos for every book with AP Canavan. We do the non-spoiler on my channel and then the spoiler ones on
On
his.
his one, yeah.
And we had some good chats with Steven Erickson and also Ian Esselmont along the way.
I've been
So
waiting for all of them. We're gonna start them in 2023. We'll see. Thinking maybe a
cool.
book a month. We'll find out. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yeah. Oh, take your time. And I think it's you'll find the right pace for you.
Hmm.
But yeah, a lot of people do think that one a month is a bit ambitious for
Oh, is it?
Malazan.
Okay. See, I don't know.
But no, you never know. I mean, I just talked to somebody who read the entire series in like 3 months. So,
Oh,
it's
geez.
just,
Yeah.
it depends on,
Depends.
yeah, yeah. But a lot of people say, no, this is just a bit too heavy. I need to give it myself some time before I go on to the next one in the
That'll
series.
probably be me.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
knowing.
yeah, which is totally cool. Another one you're going to move on, and me too, actually. So you've read Farseer, I think, right? In Realm of the
Yes.
Elderlings? Yeah,
Just Realm of the Elderlings, though.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so I want to move on in that myself too. I've only read Farseer and Live Ship Traders.
See, I haven't even read Life Ship, and everyone's like, Life Ship's the best one. I have Ship of Madness upstairs. No, Ship of Magic
Ship of Magic is the first
upstairs.
one. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Ship of Magic. I have it upstairs, ready to go. I mean, it came though, and I'm like, oh, it's such a big book, and I know it's going to be so depressing. So like,
I don't know if you were to ask me for a prediction, I would guess that you're going to really love Live Ship Traders.
everyone said that. I
Yeah,
know, I know, I know. I know. I just got to start it. There's so many things like that where starting's the hardest part, and then once you start, you're like, oh yeah, this is amazing. I don't know why I waited so long to just start this, but
yeah.
I told my husband the other day, I was like, I'm always so intimidated to start a big book because it just like feels like it's going to be so time commitment. But then every one of my single favorite books, they're all over 600 pages. So like I know, like I know I like it. So why every time am I like, oh, I just don't want to?
It's starting that's hardest, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's awesome. And I will be following your Malazan journey closely. And if you have any questions
I'm
or
sure I will be messaging you.
you want to message anytime you want. I would be
The
more than
only thing I remember about the Gardens of the Moon is a character named Whiskey Jack.
That's a
It
good
is
one.
literally the
Yeah.
only thing I remember just because his name was really weird. So it like stuck in my brain.
Yeah, Malazan is good for weird names. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plenty of those. You'll probably remember Animander Rake as well, but
I mean, the
or
name sounds familiar. I could not tell you a single thing about that character.
okay.
But
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I will be interested in your thoughts for sure. And the series
okay.
really does um I can't even begin to describe to you what it felt like finishing that series for the second time for me this
Mm.
year. And just I will say that it's only this that I have never cried as much as when I read The Crippled God, the 10th book. I mean, just constantly trying to particularly the last few hundred pages, just wow, this is such an amazing experience. But
When you spend so much time in a world and characters too, like that is the one advantage of those long series and why I end up loving them so much,
yep,
is they become so much a part of you because you have so many pages with them. Like
so
that's how I
true.
felt about the Dandelion Dynasty. I was like, well, this was like 4,000 pages I was with these characters. So like
Yeah.
you just I feel a little stronger a lot of the times than when it's just a standalone.
Yeah, that is so true. Yeah, you do build up that connection after all that
And did
time.
you were you reading Malazan before they were all out?
No, I that's another
Oh,
one
okay.
I came to pretty late. They were all published, I think, the first time. Yeah, they were the first time I even read the series, which was
Okay.
a few
Because that can
years.
also influence it. You know, if you're like
Yeah,
waiting for the books and it's been like decades that you've been reading these characters, you know?
yeah, that is true. Yeah, I started after he had finished The Crippled God. Yeah.
Okay. I don't even know when The Crippled God came out. Did that come out like in the 90s? Was it a while ago?
No, no, I think somewhere around 2010, I think.
Oh, okay.
So I'm
It's
not,
much more
that's
recent.
might be a year or two or three off, but somewhere around 2010, I think.
Okay.
He came out with them pretty fast, though. Once the series started going, he wrote like one a year, and they're huge books. So
He's pretty prolific. I remember seeing like a graph, people like Chart Sanderson and Stephen King and Stephen Erickson, and I think
yeah,
Erickson is like he's known as being pretty prolific.
he was for Malazan Book of the Fallen. That just sort of came out of him, I think. And the other series, though, I think less maybe
Less so.
as fast. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but he's got a couple other ones going. He's got the sequel trilogy, the Witness trilogy, and
Mhm.
then he's got a prequel trilogy, which a lot of us have been waiting for a while for the third book in that one.
Okay.
And he's got the Bocaline and Corbel Broach novellas, which are really just absurdist humor, and you'll meet some of that absurdist humor in the main
In
Malazan Book of the Fallen, but it's it's a very niche thing, I think, the Bocaline and Corbel Broach novellas. So I would, yeah. So it's good that you're going for Malazan Book of the Fallen first.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean that's and it's I feel like it's one of the only major fantasy series that's like not on my list. Like I feel like I need to just read it too to just be like I did it. I read the like the famous the standard fantasy series.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. I guess I feel that way too. There are certain big series out there that I want to think, okay, if I'm a real fantasy fan, I have to have read these, right? Yeah,
Yeah, or at least try. Like I don't have to finish it if I hate it or whatever, but at least
yeah.
give it a try, you know?
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah,
But the truth is, I think you should read what you want to read and then enjoy it, really. So,
totally. Yeah,
yeah.
I do get enjoyment though out of understanding the history of fantasy. Like I had done a video a while ago where I kind of researched the history of Western fantasy, and I've been slowly trying to read all of those,
Cool.
just because
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to see where the genre came from. You know,
Yeah.
anything from fairy tales to King Arthur to
Yep.
obviously Lord of the Rings. I'd already read that, but
Mhm.
it's just very interesting to see its development. I feel like.
Yeah. No, that's where I sort of started out. Have you read any William Morris yet?
No, but he is on my list.
Okay. I wrote my dissertation on William Morris,
Oh,
but
you
it
did?
was,
Okay.
yeah, more focused on his translations of Icelandic sagas and
Mm.
Beowulf, but I also did read all of his fantasies. They called them prose romances in the 1890s.
Yes,
But
yes.
yeah.
Prose romances. I did read about that. No, but speaking of Beowulf, I read three translations this year of Beowulf.
Cool.
And I was getting to my fourth, and I was like, you know what? I am burnt out of Beowulf. I have Tolkien's left, and I was like, I just can't do it right now. I will read it later. So I have that. I'm gonna read it eventually, but I got a little burnt out.
Yeah. Well, that is of course that's my wheelhouse. I'm an old
Yes.
English guy, and so
So
I
does
read.
Beowulf, here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Does Beowulf have like the hold on you as it has apparently on a lot of people who study like Old English? Like, do you just feel like it is magical and it just like captures your heart?
Yes, but
Okay.
here's why. And I think if you're reading Beowulf like a modern fantasy reader is reading a fantasy, I think it'll be disappointing. If you're just looking at it for the plot, it's a very simple plot.
Right.
The guy kills three monsters, in the course of his life, and there's a separation between the first two in terms of his age, and the third, where I mean, spoiler for Beowulf. He dies
He
fighting
dies.
the dragon. But if you read it, and the best explanation of Beowulf I've ever read to this day is Tolkien's essay, Beowulf, the Monsters and the Critics. And if you want to know what that poem, to me, I think Tolkien does just a beautiful job of explaining. It's not an epic, it's a lament. If you read this poem as a lament, specifically a lament for the past, I think that's where you get the most out of it. And then
Mhm.
you begin to understand, oh, this okay. Most likely the poet was a Christian somewhere in around the 700s in
Mhm.
Anglo-Saxon England, looking back on his pagan ancestors and the way that they tried to deal with mortality, which of course would be different from the Christian
Right.
poet who believed in God and believed in heaven and salvation and all of that. But his pagan ancestors, whom he admires their courage, their loyalty. He admires how they face their doom, unflinchingly. But there are things about their heroic ideal that obviously a Christian would have issues with, such as vengeance being imperative, or the other one would be seeking glory as a means of dealing with mortality. For the Christian, there's a certain futility to that, right? From the
Mhm.
Christian perspective. So Beowulf is that in that sense is this Christian poet expressing this admiration, but also this kind of sorrow at looking at the past. And the uber theme of the poem really is life's fleetingness, that everything falls away. Your friends, your family, your treasure, everything, even your glory. And so for the Christian poet, looking back on the pagans and their struggles dealing with mortality and the harshness of life and the suffering around them, there's a certain tragedy to all that, a certain beauty at the same time. But ultimately, there's also even a futility to it because they didn't have what he considered to be his salvation, right? He had hope for the future because of his particular faith. So if you're reading a poem like that and then you realize, oh, that's what all these side stories are about, that they reinforce this theme. There's this woman whose son and whose brother die in a battle. And what's that got to do
And
with
then there's,
Beowulf? You
yeah,
begin
this
to
whole
realize,
thing, there's a whole side quest, or not quite quest, but side story about,
yeah,
this marriage and what's
yeah.
Beowulf's opinion on the marriage and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly. But if you look at it thematically, which is how they told stories back then, because they are emerging from oral formulaic tradition, they didn't think of stories in the linear way that we do. They had associative qualities to their storytelling, where they would have a certain theme going, and if there was another story that reinforced that theme, they'd bring it in.
Mhm.
Kind of like the way my mother tells stories. She would start with
Yeah.
one story and then, oh, that reminds me. And then she'd go off on this other one. 5 stories later, we get back to the original one. Um, but I think if you read it that way, to me anyway, it's just so beautiful and profoundly moving. It's about mortality and how we deal with the fact that everything we love disappears, you know. So yeah, that's how I read it anyway.
That actually, thank you. That helps me put it much more into perspective because I mean, I did know that it wasn't going to be like a modern fantasy tale. I knew that this
Right.
was going to be some sort of moral something, right? But
Yeah.
I was reading, it's particularly Seamus Haney's
Mhm.
version, and I read just for fun. There's a new translation. I forget the
Maria.
author. Yes,
um,
yes. It's like the blue, really shockingly blue cover.
yeah. The feminist retelling of Beowulf.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then I started Tolkien's. I read the like notes of his in the beginning. But
Yeah.
all three of those are just going on and on about like how much they love this poem and how it changed their lives and like
Yeah.
the scholarship and how they have to study it. And I was like, guys, I just don't get it. Like I can't relate. Like I can't relate to this, feeling. And so when people love it, I like to just ask them, like, please share with me. But that helps. And you know what? Maybe having that in mind as I go into Tolkien's, which I know is not necessary. It's more of a prose. It's not. I don't think he like directly translated it. He more
It's a prose translation.
storyfied it. Yeah, like a prose translation.
Yeah.
So
Although
have you read?
it's a lyrical kind of prose translation. It has a cadence to
Yes.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it was so interesting reading Seamus Heaney's and all the work he did to try to like keep that rhyme scheme. I mean, that was fascinating. I just can't believe someone worked that hard. But yes, fascinating. But did you read Heaney's then translation?
Yes. In fact, when I teach Beowulf, I use Seamus Heaney's translation.
Oh, sorry, not Heaney's. I'm sorry. Did you read the new one? I knew you read this. This is like
yes.
the most famous one. I don't know why I said Heaney. What's her last name? I thought it was. Does that start with H2? Like Healy?
It's Maria something, and I think
Maria. Okay, sorry.
Start with an H.
Supposedly, Seamus Heaney's is like the most well-renowned. I was positive you had read his, but yeah. Have you read Maria's?
I have not yet, and I keep telling myself I really need to read this. So
yeah, it was really interesting.
Did you like it?
I liked parts of it. My favorite part about it is actually the modern language in it, which is used purposely to be silly. But she talked a lot about how much in Old English there's dead words that are very difficult to translate, and she wanted to make a translation that had an equal amount of dead words, that in like 200 years these words would have no meaning anymore because they're so of the time. And I found that personally to be very insightful. A look into language and like some of the really hilarious words she uses, like bro and things like that are very jarring but are purposely meant to be like words that she thinks will be a dead language, I really enjoyed that. Like that was a very, for me, funny and interesting. It helped me ruminate a little bit on Old English, a little like, and the different ways you could interpret that. Otherwise, I felt, I mean, she loves it, so she knows more than I do. So I don't really feel like I'm a person to like criticize someone's translation. Let's be clear. I do not scholar, but I did feel that she interpreted things out of it that I didn't necessarily, reading the other translations I had read two before, that maybe missed the mark for me, even on some of the themes I had gotten out of Beowulf, understanding that it wasn't really about Beowulf himself. It was about something else. And I think her translations makes it a little bit more about the surface story necessarily than the understory. So I wasn't necessarily moved by that personally.
Yeah.
But I did find it fascinating.
My impression is that it's more of a retelling than a straight translation.
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes, that is what I should have said as well. It is a retelling of Beowulf.
Yeah. Headley, by the way. Maria Headley.
Headley, oh, it is an H. Okay, so I'm not crazy. Like, I always got their last names confused.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I found it was fascinating, though, and I do think on my trying to understand Beowulf journey, it was a good implement in there, because it did help me understand the original story a little bit better, just because it was from a different perspective.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm still young on my understanding Beowulf journey.
Well, the best way, of course, to read it is in Old English, But...
You know what? Yeah, I'll get back to you on that one, Philip. Because the Heaney translation has the Old English like side by side.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Or at least the version I have, they have it side by side, and I was like, I didn't realize Old English is literally incomprehensible. Like,
it's like
a different language. Have you read it in Old English then?
Oh yeah, many times. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's above my pay grade by quite a bit. But that's why they don't call you Dr. Fantasy for nothing. So
well, my whole story is that it's Tolkien's fault, really, because I read Tolkien as like a 12 or 13-year-old, was blown away, and thought to myself, I want to do that. And so instead of reading modern fantasy, I went off and learned Old English and Old Norse and a bunch of languages, Welsh, and and I thought that's how you become a fantasy author, because that's what Tolkien did. Right?
So you're one of those smart kids. You were a smart kid who did smart
I don't
people's
know if you could
themes.
call that smart. If I had been smart, I would have actually read modern fantasy. But anyway, yeah. So, but that ship has sailed. So,
So fun. That's so cool, though. What a cool skill. So you need to do your own translation then.
I have translated quite a few sections of Beowulf
Have
actually
you?
on my own. I've not published anything, obviously,
Mhm.
but yeah, I did my master's thesis on a different Old English poem called "The Wanderer,"
Mhm.
and I did a translation and an edition of that. And as I said, my PhD dissertation was involved in the Morris translation of Beowulf, at
Oh,
least.
okay.
So yeah,
Yeah, I haven't picked up his. His did come up on my search as like one of the more famous ones, but
you wouldn't want to read his translation. It's just
perfect. Thank you.
so archaic. It's just heavily archaic.
And
So
maybe that's why at the time I had decided against it. Like I can't really remember. I like chose four, and
yeah, you would almost need a translation for Morris's translation, I think.
that's
So
too deep for me. I'll leave that to the scholars. I'll leave that to you guys.
yeah, yeah. So, well, I want to hear about something slightly more modern, which is your role and what you're discovering in the SPFBO, if you don't mind telling me about that, because I'm very, very curious about that. I obviously know the basics. I know Mark Lawrence and his role in starting this thing up, but there's a lot of people involved. And now you're one of the judges. And how is that
Yes.
experience going?
It's been really fun. I mean, it's very overwhelming. Like there's so many books. That's why I had people help me out because we got 30 books, and for
Wow.
me, it was just like I could do the 30 book thing, but I would be DNFing them very liberally because
Uh-huh.
there's just no other way I'm gonna get through this. Because I know some people on here they read hundreds of books a year. That is not me.
That's not me either.
Like I read like in general about a book a week. That's my
Yep,
cadence,
that's
and
me. Yeah.
yeah, longer books are going to take longer sometimes. Some books take shorter. But yeah,
Yep.
it's that 50 to 60 book sweet spot a year. Great. Perfect.
Yep.
So 30 books. That's 6 months for me, at the very least.
Mm.
7 months, maybe. So I would just never be able to read all of that. So I had people help me, which I did purposely because the whole point of, for those who don't know, SPFBO stands for self published fantasy blog off. So it's a way to get eyes on self published fantasy. And the point is to get eyes on it. So I wanted people actually reading the books. People read the books. And so by having a team of 5, they could all get 6 books. And then I read all of their semifinalists. So that helped. But yeah, so now we're on to the finalists, and I've read 2.5 of them.
Wow.
And it's really a cool experience because the publishing is kind of in a weird flex right now.
Yep. It sure is.
Books are just in general as a media, like we had the revolution of the ebook, which I had done a lot of research on this. I don't know how much you know about that, but ebooks didn't end up being the death of publishing like people thought.
No.
Yeah, it took a sizable chunk of the market and then stopped. Like it's
Yep.
not growing anymore. It took a chunk and then was done.
Yep.
But now we're kind of in a new flex because there's more books available than ever before.
Yep.
Thousands and thousands of being published every year. And so it's harder and harder to get recognized and actually go through traditional publishing means. And people in traditional
Yep.
publishing means sometimes are becoming unhappy because if you're not one of the big sellers, then they don't push your book
They
and
drop
you don't
you.
they drop
Yeah.
you and you have no control over, because like some of them don't drop you but they don't advertise you either, and you're not allowed to advertise yourself. I've heard some
Ouch.
stories.
Yeah. I
Or
have
not
to.
allowed to, yeah, not allowed to own your work in the way that you want anymore. And so self-publishing is kind of on the rise, especially with Amazon, because they do print on demand and
Yep.
Kindle Unlimited. So these things have made self-publishing easier than ever before. Now, there are some amazing self-published books, and there are also a lot of what you would expect with self-published
Yeah.
because they don't have to go through certain eyes. And so yeah, I mean, I know you know all this. This is more just people watching.
Oh yeah, it's
So
very
Mark
helpful.
Lawrence, started that competition to like help weed out, you know, all of the stuff. And
Yeah.
the Sword of Kaigen was a winner of
Yeah.
SPFBO, and one of my favorite fantasy books I've ever read.
Cool.
And I think a good example of a book that probably wouldn't have been traditionally published
Mm.
because it doesn't follow a 3 arc story. It follows a 5 stage story arc where
Huh.
the climax comes in the middle and then the rest is falling action.
Uh-huh.
And truthfully, publishers, and I don't blame them, publishers have to publish what they think will make money. And
Yeah.
often that is stuff that you see before, and so self-publishing, I think, can give us more interesting storylines, can also be better for diversity. For
Yep.
example, shockingly, in the adult self-published, fantasy blog off, like 50 or more percent of the authors are female.
Great.
Um,
Yeah.
that is and it's definitely not like that in adult fantasy outside of that. So anyway, just a really cool opportunity. And it's been really good reading some good books.
Yeah.
One of the ones I read was really good, and I'm very
Wow.
excited to write a review about that. So,
I'm about to read one of the finalists myself by coincidence, and that's Tiago Abdallah's A Touch of Light.
oh yeah,
But yeah.
I haven't gotten to that one yet.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's exciting. It's exciting to me, and I think what you said earlier, I think that a lot of people don't fully understand when they start writing a book, a novel, how much you have to put into that. That when you get to the end of the book, and you're like, "Yay, I'm done." It's really like step one. That's step one. As much as you feel like you just put in all this work, it's really not a product you want to put out in the world unless you're just a genius, and then I'm sorry, okay, then fine. But most people are going to finish a novel and then they're really going to need to revise on their own, and then get a whole bunch of other eyes if they can on that book, as preferably somebody that you have to pay a lot of money to if you can afford that. So it's very expensive, and that's the issue for, I think, most self-published authors, is it's so expensive to have a developmental editor, to hire a good artist to do your cover, and you can end up most of probably spend more on putting the book out than they will ever make from the book. So that's
Advertising and the art becomes more important when you don't have Tor backing you, because you have to
yeah,
catch people, and an audiobook is extremely expensive,
yeah.
and even buying the ISBN numbers to get published,
Wow.
it's huge. And I wouldn't have known any of that if my husband didn't start self-publishing. I mean, that's really how we got into this, like,
Yeah, yeah.
gosh, 5 years now, maybe ago, he started
Okay.
doing this whole thing, and it just like, then we got involved in it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm sure was a huge education for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, learn by fire, trial by fire for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know what's going to happen when I'm currently looking for a publisher, and if a traditional one doesn't pan out, I'm going to end up self-publishing next year. So I'll probably be bothering you for some advice at
You
some point.
can. I can't promise it's going to be good advice, but we can tell you what we've learned. That's very,
Okay.
very exciting. Yeah, he was going to shop for a little bit, but it just gets so overwhelming, like with an agent and the publishing. Do you have an agent right now?
I do. So it's funny because I was just talking to PL Stewart about this
Mm.
topic for this hasn't come out yet, but the episode of Dear Dr. Fantasy before this one, I was talking to
Oh,
PL,
you're talking about.
and basically I said it's like to be a successful traditionally published author, you have to win the lottery 3 times, and that's after working your butt off. You have to
To
work your
write the
butt off
thing.
for years. Then you have to win the lottery by getting an agent. Then you have to win the lottery by that agent successfully pitching your book to a publisher. The third lottery is when your book becomes one of the few that the publisher actually backs, that they're really going to make an effort to market. Because as you said, a lot of traditionally published books just disappear because they figure, okay, here are the 3 winners. Let's put everything behind them. Everything else goes by the wayside. And that would be a fate that I would just not want to have. And I feel
It's
awful for
terrifying.
people in that situation. I'm terrified of that. That's just, that is something that's worse than I can't imagine. So,
Well, we'll all go out and buy your book and we'll tell everyone about it. So
okay. Yeah.
make sure it
So,
doesn't happen. Yeah,
but I would
it's
much rather be
interesting.
self-published than have that fate
Mm.
of being traditionally published but be getting dropped, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting because recently, I mean, I guess not recently, it was like a few months ago, there was that whole court case about the booksellers coming together and whether it was going to be like a monopoly or not, like the publishers.
Yeah.
And, they published some data, and one of it was something like how many percentage, like most of their authors don't sell more than 12 copies or something of their book ever, or 24. It was like this crazy number.
Wow.
And yeah, that is an interesting, thing to think about, and something I think
Yeah.
BookTube has helped temper, at least for me, because before I was the person just going to the bookstore and the thing that was there, I would be like, well, and I'd pick it up and read it, and that was most likely going to be the things already selling thousands and thousands and thousands of copies. I was reading Wheel of Time, I was reading Sanderson.
Yep.
That's why I picked up Malazan. Do you know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
it is cool getting in the book community, being able to read really quality stuff that just like isn't necessarily doesn't grab the attention on the
Yep. Yeah.
bookshelf.
You're absolutely right. You're 100% right. And it's opened me up. I make an effort to read a self-published book and I try to do one a month as
Mm.
part of my, there's some people who are better, much better than I am about it. Several channels. Patrick is great. He'll read a lot of
Patrick is
self-published
good.
and really plug them. Steve from Steve Talks Books is another one who does a lot with self-published authors. And I try to do my bit because I think this platform it's really important. It's an important place to do that for the self-published authors who are out there who don't have any other means of getting the word out. And there are some great stories, as much as I said
What's your
earlier,
favorite? What's your favorite you've read so far then, if you're reading one a
of
month?
self-published books.
Mm-hmm.
I would say probably there are a couple contenders actually, and maybe three I could say. And there have been some great ones, but I really did love Richard Nell's Kings of Paradise, which is very grimdark, kind of gory one. And then there's this one written by Nicholas Lietzau called Dreams of the Dying,
Oh, Dreams
which
of the Dying.
is,
We have that one on our shelf. Zach's read
yeah,
that one, I think.
yeah.
I haven't read
So
it yet.
it's really interesting because I've never seen anybody take on the theme of depression so thoroughly and
Mm.
directly in a fantasy. And he really does a brilliant job with it. So I appreciated that very much. And then recently I read one by Von Roycroft. He just came out with his first, The Severing Sun, which is the
Mm-hmm.
first of the Sundered Nation trilogy. So those three probably leap to mind, but I've read some really great ones. And there's some I'm really looking forward to in the near future too, that I've got lined up. But
Lots of good ones. Have
yeah.
you done any of like the Never Die, Rob Hayes at all yet?
No, I haven't
Mm.
yet. I've heard of course of those, but I haven't yet.
Mm.
There's a whole lot of good ones out there. So
There are just so many good ones. I mean, just like regular, it's just more books than anyone can read. So we just got to make
that's a
the best
problem.
effort we can.
That's a huge problem we have around here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I do hope to read more and more of them, and it's a world that I'm very happy to get more exposure to. And the cool thing is, there are some well-established, traditionally published authors who will come here and chat with us, which is fantastic. I've been very fortunate to talk to Stephen Erickson and Jenny Wirtz and some others, but I feel like the self-published ones are more likely to come and chat, and it's so much fun to talk with them and learn about their writing process and their influences and talk about their stories and stuff. It's a lot of fun to engage with them.
Yeah, it is funny, but it's also a stressful thing for me as like a book reviewer because I
Yeah.
meet a lot of these authors before I read their books, and they're all amazing. They're all such great people. They're all
Yeah,
so fun and smart and everything. And nobody can like every book,
that's
and
for
that's
sure.
gonna
Yeah.
it's never someone else's favorite book. I have favorite books that like some of my very good friends just detest. Like it just
Yeah.
doesn't, it just is what it is. And that's a hard thing for me. Sometimes I feel like I just need to keep a distance until I've read and reviewed your book because it it's like the problem with a self-published author is, if I don't like a Sanderson book, just like as an example, my review means nothing to him. Like, it just
Right.
doesn't matter what my opinion is on it. Like,
Right.
who cares? But for some of these self-published authors, a review is a make or break thing. You know,
Yep.
you have Patrick reviewing your book and saying it's really good, and he's one of the most, you know, uh, respected Goodreads reviewers. Like,
Yeah.
that means something, and you're going to get so many readers from that. And so
Yep.
it does feel sometimes like a burden, like, because I want everyone to succeed, but I also feel that I have a duty to be honest about how I feel about what I read. And that has been a hard thing for me with the self-published community.
I'm sure, but it is important for you to preserve your credibility.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're not going to do anybody any good. So yeah, I think it
Yeah.
is a tough one. You're absolutely right. I've had a couple that I've read that I just didn't review because I didn't feel like I would be helping the author.
And I've done that too. And
Yeah.
I said, because like, yeah, with self-published, like, what's the point? I'm not going to get on here and give a bad review. Like, that helps no one. It doesn't make me feel good. So I'm
Right.
not going to do it. Not that I think all negative reviews are bad. I have definitely done negative reviews, but I
Yeah.
don't want to punch down. So like, I'm fine doing a negative review of someone who's got Tor backing them,
Yeah.
because then I can just explain my opinion and it's not going to hurt
Right.
their livelihood, you
Right.
know? So
Yeah.
that is the one interesting thing.
Yeah. And it might be the teacher in me, but I also, even with an established author whose book I'm reviewing, if I have something negative to say about it, I'm going to say it as if that person were right there in front of me. And I'm trying to give them, valuable
Constructive.
feedback, constructive criticism. That's how I try in my head, at least, to frame it. But I've definitely had those too, where I've said things that are critical for sure. But I won't do that as readily with a self-published author because it's
Yeah, and
just,
I think it's just keeping it constructive. You know,
yeah,
it's easy to
yeah,
keep it constructive and just be like, hey, yeah, these are some things that didn't work for me. And also recognizing, I think it was one of the actually SPFBO winners that I just bounced off hard. But objectively, I was like, this isn't the kind of book I like
yeah,
anyway. Like,
yeah,
it has nothing to do with it being self published. It's just like, it was a well written book that just is not the type of thing or subject matter that I am personally interested in. And so that can also be a good way to just be like, look, it wasn't the book, it was me.
yeah. And that's honest. That's honest. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, it is part of what we do, I guess, and we do have to negotiate that around here.
I know it's hard.
Uh, but I wish you the best with that. I think it's just fabulous that you got involved with the SPFBO, and the fact that you're doing that is a huge service. I'm sure that self-published authors are very grateful for what the judges do. It is an incredible commitment. So
It's been
yeah,
really fun. I'm
yeah,
super grateful to be able to be a part of it for sure.
cool. Yeah, wow. Well, this has been fun too, by the way. I've enjoyed
Thank you.
had this incredible opportunity to chat with you about some of our favorites and about what we do around here. It's just been lovely having this chance to. It's our first conversation
Yes.
actually, and
I've watched a lot of your videos, so I do feel like I know you a little bit.
okay,
But yeah, we've
good.
never talked face to face, you know?
Yes,
So it's been
and
fun.
it's always a weird thing. I remember the first time even having a collaboration with somebody, and it was surreal almost because this person whose videos you watch, you kind of feel like you know them, but then when you're really actually talking to them, it's a different thing, isn't it? So yeah.
It is funny. My first collaboration, I like almost broke out in hives. I was so nervous
Oh
about
no.
talking to people. I have a lot of social anxiety, and so like I was so stressed. But now it's been really one of the best parts, I think, of YouTube for
Yeah.
me is talking to the other creators.
Yeah.
Now I
That's
know you
all.
guys are all nice. Like, I don't know. I had it in my head like someone was gonna be mean, but
Oh no.
all the booktubers are so nice. It's like such a fun community. So I think you started your channel in 2020?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, so the class of 2020.
Class of 2020.
Class of 2020, I feel like is just such a great community. It has been one of the best parts of being on BookTube, at least for me personally.
Well, I am certainly grateful and glad that you are part of this community. And,
Thank you.
thank you
Thank you for
so much.
having me on.
Yeah, everybody, if you for some reason you don't know about Bookborn, I'll have a link to her channel in the description, and go and check out. It's just fantastic content over there, very thoughtful, always does a lot of research on some really great important topics too. I didn't even get to talk about those videos, but I've admired quite a few of your videos.
Thank you. That means a lot. Thank you. Coming from you, that means a lot. You're,
Yeah, no, I think
again,
you have.
Dr. Fantasy. I'll take it
Oh,
as a good compliment.
well, I admire your courage in taking on those topics and doing a good job with them too. So
Thank you.
thank you for being a great part of this community.
Thanks for having me. It was so good to talk, and thank you for helping me appreciate Beowulf a little more. I'll go
Yep.
into Tolkien with a new, renewed sense of what I'm supposed to get out of that, you know?
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, everybody, thanks so much for watching, and until next time.